All right, everyone. So season 2 starts in just under 24 hours, and that means we got to figure out what class you are playing, I am playing, and all that good stuff for season launch. Now, I've done many tier lists on the channel, but let's be honest, guys, who really cares about how insane a class is? Because it's just going to be rogue every time. Like, it's rogue, it's been rogue, it will be rogue, it will forever be rogue. So just play the rogue if you want to kill stuff very quickly and do really well. But if you're here to figure out some of the pros and cons of each classes, some of the things you're going to get out of them, and some of the kind of angles of fun you're going to be having, that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. Because that is actually what I've been focusing on with my little bit of a hiatus from Diablo 4. I took a little bit of a break, and I really wanted to focus in on just enjoying each of the classes. So that's what we're going to do today, and talk a little bit about the things that are changing and some things that I would love to try out on each of the classes. Now, for me, well, I mean, just because the rogue is the best isn't the reason I'm picking the rogue, but it is the reason I'm picking the rogue. I've been playing the rogue the entire time of Diablo 4 the most. I've tried all the classes. I've played all the classes. I've gone and tried a lot of the different builds for all the classes. Of course, not all of them, but rogue has just been consistently the one I've jumped around with the most, literally, because they jump around a ton, and I love doing that, right? So that's not going to change. And out of all the classes, the reason I wanted to start with rogue today is because they are the simplest. I was going to say the dumbest, but that's not the case. It's just the simplest. Not in terms of mechanics, right? Because there is a lot of button mashing, and you do have to make sure you're using your dashes in the proper way, and you know, kind of sequencing your skills, quite importantly, in the right way, because they are very squishy, some of the squishier classes in the game. But the mobility provided, the ability to kind of just have all of the options available to them, because they have the most balanced kits out of any class in the game, and they have been the most balanced characters across the game since day one, right? Yes, their Twisting Blades build at the very beginning was far and away better than any other build, but if you looked at every other class, they were even more unbalanced. And nowadays, yes, Twisting Blades is still going to be a fantastic build, but there are so many other options that are really strong. Even one that I want to dive way more into. I did a little bit in Season 1, but a basic only puncture rogue would sound very, very fun, and that's probably what I'll be trying as one of my initial builds running up, okay? So, rogue is the one I'm most likely going to be playing, and you're going to get the exact same sort of experience as what I expect as you did in Season 1 or Season 0. They're going to change the least. Hopping over to Barbarian. Has things really changed for the Barbarian? Unfortunately, I will say that the Barbarian, honestly, is still struggling quite a bit with the earlier processes in the game. They're still going to struggle on the leveling process, and that could be a little bit unfun for most people, because when I consider leveling, well, I'm considering like the 1 to 50, maybe even 1 to 60 process. That's the vast majority of you players out there. And unfortunately, they are solid if you're going to use like a Ren build or just straight up go pure on damage. Yeah, you can do some good stuff with the Barbarian. It's not the worst, but it's significantly slower than the Sorcerer, the Necromancer, and the Rogue, all three of them. And that can feel a little bit unfortunate. But some things that are really, really cool starting into Season 2, there's really two things that I would love to try on the Barbarian. They've kind of changed how Berserking has interacted with a lot of the skills, kind of making it towards a multiplicative scaling, and the lack of vulnerable damage and crit damage being multiplicative scaling means that Berserking can be really, really powerful. And that's not something I've seen be a really, really interesting kind of all-in mechanic. There are some builds that did use it in previous iterations, and there were some that are kind of pretty good. But I do think that the Berserking kind of concept is way, way buffed up, and I'm really excited to dive in and try a bunch of things with Berserking. The second thing is Upheaval. Now, Upheaval is kind of one of the coolest skills in the game, or one of the cooler skills in the game. Maybe it's bias from the beta when we were hitting absurd numbers, or just in general from Upheaval hitting absurd numbers, but just being able to launch that massive conal attack seems really, really cool to me. And with a lot of the unique changes and the specific skill buffs to Upheaval, I can really see the Barbarian kind of having a lot of newer, more interesting builds for the latter game parts. Of course, there's still going to be decent for the end game. I would say that they're significantly worse than they were previously. And so they're not going to be by far the strongest class, not even close, and you will struggle a little bit. But I think that they have kind of the most interesting buffs to a lot of their skills that were not so great, alongside the Necromancer. So the Necromancer is another one that I'm finding really, really exciting personally, because the Necromancer is the one I've certainly played the second most. And one thing that I could never really get to work all too well is, oh, you see him popping up right there, the Skelly Boys, guys. These things are so trash, or we're so trash. But there are so many buffs to the ability to kind of keep them alive with the, I think it's something Death's passive, where you have the prevention of kind of getting your summons nuked, got really, really quite buffed. Your actual minion potential damage got quite buffed. And overall, just the entire minion build got buffed. They're still excellent in the earlier game process, especially in terms of laziness factor and ease of leveling. They just do a lot of damage. You can use things like Blood Surge. I've seen just random Corpse Explosion, just destroying things. And I actually think minion builds now with all the buffs are going to be really, really exciting. And if you're someone who wanted to play Necromancer for the summoning fantasy, well, it's finally coming true, in my opinion. I think there's going to be a lot of potential for the Necromancer for those reasons. They're still going to have similar issues to what they had before, which is, oh my goodness, they are actual snails. Oh my goodness. If you go from Rogue to Necromancer, you're going to feel the pain of how slow the Necromancer is. And this is completely fine if you don't care about that. But if you do care about moving quickly, you're still going to have that issue. To me, though, one of the coolest things about the Necromancer, and you're not going to get anywhere else, is those summons. So if you're able to benefit from those, and I do think you will with Season 2, you're going to have quite a bit of fun. Now, there's also like the Infinimus still, and still a lot of endgame viability. I still think Bone Spear is going to be okay. It's not going to be a dead build. Maybe I'm overhyping it, but even with all the significant nerfs to Bone skills and such, I still think it's going to be a solid build. So if you want to go back to the old reliable with the Necromancer, you can do that as well. But Necromancer, along with Barbarian, to me, got the most interesting and significant changes for me to try out. On to the Sorcerer here. This is a class that I have been really, really disappointed with. Probably the most disappointed of any class for me has been the Sorcerer, because it's the one I wanted to play the most, even more so than the Rogue initially. But to me, the kind of playstyle of the Sorcerer didn't really fit how I wanted to. And honestly, I just wasn't impressed with the build variety either, because basically every single fire option was just trash, right? Incinerate was trash. Fireball was trash. Hydra got significantly nerfed. It kind of felt pretty trash. Firewall was decent later game when you could like stall out the battles. And now they've buffed up Fireball a lot. It's not like the most insane build ever, but it's quite solid. They've buffed up Incinerate, which I still think is probably going to be a meme, but that's okay. They've changed a lot of the Paragon nodes around the fire-oriented skills for Sorcerer. So honestly, overall, the Sorcerer has kind of leveled out the most compared to what it was before. Because Ice builds dominated. While Ice builds are still, in my opinion, the best, such as Blizzard Sorcerer, things like that, you're still going to have a lot of options to go for. And to me, the Sorcerer has gotten a lot more interesting because of that. Not only that, but you're also going to find that the leveling process is going to be still quite fun, still quite enjoyable, and just absolutely be able to crush it with just high DPS, which is always a fun experience. And being able to transition into that latter game point and using builds like Arc Lash or Chain Lightning, which are buffed as well, is going to be quite fun. Overall, the thing that I've just enjoyed the most about the changes from Season 1 to Season 2 is kind of just giving us more options with the Sorcerer that don't just combo with all the different ice options. I want to play with fire, I want to play with a little bit more lightning, and all the changes kind of facilitate that. Now, when you reach the end game, they are still going to struggle a lot. To be honest, they might be the worst endgame class just because of kind of the scaling isn't quite there for them. The mix of damage and tankiness just doesn't reach that potential nearly as high as any other class. With a lot of the Paragon node changes, perhaps this changes a little bit, but to be honest, you don't really play him for that. If you're really looking to push endgame, maybe this isn't the class for you. But we're not talking about that. We don't care about that. We're here to have some fun. And I will say Sorcerer is one of the most exciting ones for me to try out. I obviously want to try out the minion build for sure. That's the one I'm probably most excited about, besides all reintroducing me to the rogue. But the Sorcerer, really diving into all the different variations that have been improved, seems really, really exciting to me. Druid. Last one here. Honestly, the Druid is kind of an interesting one, because to me, the Druid has kind of a similar tendency to the Rogue, where they haven't really gotten a whole lot of changes. And that's because a lot of their builds are very, very good. You have Tornado, Shred, you have the Bulwark, which was kind of bugged, which has changed since then. You had the Trample Slide, which is honestly not that great. But you had Pulverize, Stormclaw, the Lightning Storm build. Like, all these options were actually quite good. And their endgame potential was also very, very good because of this. The core issue, and the reason why people haven't looked at Druid the same way they looked at Rogue, is because of their pretty bad early game feel. And they still have that, unfortunately. And I would say the Druid has the biggest ramp up time out of any class. And the way I see this is, out of any class, I think the Druid, from what I've experienced, has a core focus on specific items, right? Because they unlock your permaforms and your ability to really ramp up your builds, right? And so anytime I hear people talk about the Druid, any casual players like, man, I feel like the Druid just didn't really do much for me. And that's probably because you do need to invest quite a bit of time for the Druid, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be completely useless in the early game. When I say they have a weak leveling process and they are potentially the weakest leveler of the group, maybe comparable to Barbarian here, that doesn't mean that they're trash. Yes, it doesn't feel nearly as good as any of the other classes, with the exception of Barbarian maybe, but that doesn't mean you're gonna be miserable, I guess, depending on who you are. You could still enjoy the Druid. I found that their damage, even in the 20s to 30s, will ramp up, and you can one-shot packs with things like Pulverize, but it's not going to be as smooth. It just feels a little bit more clunky, and that it would be the big complaint. But man, oh man, is the payoff big. If you get to those end games, you get to the Tornado builds, you get your Perma Wolf, your Perma Bear, whatever you want to run with, you will feel like an absolute beast. And one thing that's really, really cool about this is they can face tank and survive like no other class in the game. The amount of damage reduction they have with like the shout, amount of damage reduction or fortify potential, especially with fortifying being buffed and scaling off of your max HP now, really buffs up things like the Druid. I'm seeing a lot of potential coming out from the Druid, and I'm really excited to try a lot of things with the Druid, especially with all the changes coming in Season 2. Just to kind of like the minute details of the Druid, right? Like, you don't think about it, but fortifying being scaling off max HP is actually a massive buff, not only to the Druid, but also to any other class that is using Fortify. If you're trying it on Barb, if you're using it on Necromancer, right? These classes are also benefiting from it, but I think the Druid probably took the most advantage out of something like Fortify, and so like those minute changes that may not affect the whole game at large necessarily, like not every class, focus in on classes like the Druid that really want to benefit from it. So I'm really excited about that, and I think that every single class here is more exciting than Season 1 was when that started, by a large margin. Like, there's no class where I'm going into and I'm like, dang, that class kind of probably sucks, like I don't want to try them at all. Yes, there's going to be stronger classes. Yes, I think the Rogue is going to be the strongest overall class. Yes, I think the Necromancer is going to be solid overall. Yes, I think the Druid is going to be an endgame beast. These things are still consistent, but it's not like, oh man, Sorcerer is going to be absolute dog water. The Hydra and the Conjuration versions of this, Frozen Orb, Ice Blades, these types of things are actually really, really cool. I think it's going to be very powerful. The Barbarian, I'm really excited to try Upheaval, Berserking, as I said, Summons for Necro. You have so much potential and so much excitement compared to Season 1 and Season 0. Does this mean the whole game's changing? No, it just means that the classes themselves have more to explore than ever before, and that hopefully gives you a little bit of kind of my perspective on every class and what I'm excited about. If any of those appeal to you, let me know in the comment section down below what class you are looking to try out the most. Or maybe I mentioned, or I didn't mention, rather, something that you are excited about. Let me also know in the comment section down below. Because who knows? Maybe after I dive into the rogue and experience a lot of the rogue stuff has to offer for season 2, I might dive into a different class other than the Necromancer because someone convinced me to do so. I don't know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.